Hi, I'm Don Vosburg. I'm a guy who is not a programmer, but I still contribute to open source, right? Mostly by submitting bugs and by trying to implement this stuff. So I'm the person who has been complaining about your lack of documentation and trying to do things by Google for many years. So I work for SUSE in my day job, but in my part-time hobbyish things, I'm a consultant, and my biggest customer is a school district in Anderson, Indiana, a private school. And I have with me 3 of my current and former co-workers. This is my son, Duncan. He's studying at Ball State University. This is Trent Zimmer. Trent is a high school student at APA, Anderson Preparatory Academy. And this is Zach. Zach Painter is a student at Rose-Hulman University. So, yeah, wow. Go engineers, right? Okay, so power your directory with Samba. This is actually a reprise of a topic I spoke on 10 years ago at Ohio Linux Fest. So some of you are old enough to remember that. I spoke on Samba, So You Think You Can Dance. And in them days, it was ugly as heck, but it's still somewhat ugly, but we're gonna have an adventure together and enjoy and have a good time. So always I ask myself the question first, why the heck would anybody want to do this? Okay, so we'll explore that. A bit about Samba and OpenSUSE. Sorry, it's my context, right? Okay, so I'm wearing my CentOS shirt just so you guys can feel better, right? But we do have some CentOS, but specifically this project was done on OpenSUSE. So, and then I'll explain the case study environment. Why am I cutting in and out, Chief? What's going on with that? And then how we implemented it, including some of the implementers that are here in this room. Yeah, it's still on. Okay. And then we'll do a live look-in. I don't want to call it a demo because it's the real thing. Okay? So we're looking at one in production. Jason, oh my gosh, I haven't seen you for a long time. How are you? So why do this at all? First, because you have more time than money, which is especially true of the school district that just paid me yesterday for work done in July. Active Directory is like the standard for interoperability. Come on, you know, don't try to tell me that it's not. Everyone uses AD, even though it came from Microsoft, right? The simplicity and ubiquity of the administrative tools around it are just out there. So everybody knows how to run the user tools for Active Directory, and we'll look at some of that. Even part-time persons know how to use that, and it's easier for me to hand them that than to say, oh, just add an LDAP user. Right. And because Linux is just way cooler than Windows, this is a reason. It's at the bottom of the reasons, because doing things because they're cool does not sell very much, okay? So how does Samba deliver AD? So those of you who have been around for a long time, grew up with, how many of you installed Samba 2? Anybody? Oh yeah, whoa, okay, so you're older than me. No, I'm just kidding you. You're probably not older. You might be older than me. I'm in my 60s, so. Samba 4 was a promise for a long time, and the integration and promise of creating Active Directory is a nice thing. And several key services get consolidated into what is the Samba AD DC service. So Samba basically used to be just SMB, and NMB. So you had Samba shares, and then you had Windbind to do some of the translation between the POSIX, UID, GIDs, and the Windows stuff for identity things. But what Samba's done is build a tool where I have LDAP, DNS, and Kerberos all controlled in one centralized service called Samba. So it has a single configuration tool, Samba-tool. This is from the Linux point of view, okay? So once you're done setting it up on the Linux side, you can give people the Active Directory tools to be able to administer. So from the Linux side, though, Samba-tool is the thing. The default Kerberos server that comes along with that encryption in Samba is Heimdall. So how many of you Red Hat people run Heimdall? Nobody, right? Because we're all MIT Kerberos people. Both Red Hat and SUSE use MIT Kerberos. Heimdall was not the server of choice. And thus, before Samba 4.7, your only choice was to run it on a distribution that was not SUSE or Red Hat. Okay? So MIT was actually added in 4.7, and this timing sort of coalesced with my project. So you'll see some of the pains from that too. DNS, you have your choice. You can either use the internal DNS, which has the Windows-ish extensions to DNS that make it special, right? DNS was perfectly fine before Microsoft jacked it up. But, wow, it's true, ain't it? Yeah, they changed it a lot. So you can either use the internal one, or you can actually use a bind configuration for AD. In my example, we chose to subdomain. So our DNS control for the AD domain is a subdomain, ad.libertyonline.org. And the rest of it is all bind. But I just took the AD part and let it be part of the Samba tool. And it really worked out. I was scared. LDAP is also handled only by the internal Samba service. So don't try to implement Samba AD thinking you'll be able to use your OpenLDAP or 389DS server. It won't work. Samba recommends a separate domain controller for AD. So don't put the shares on the same instance that you're running the DC, okay? And we're in a world where it's not about trying to consolidate everything onto one monolithic server anyway. So splitting that up is not a bad idea. I did mine with all VMs, which, it makes sense to cut it up like that. So here's some of the limitations of Samba AD, and this maybe goes back to ask me again, why in the world would I do this? There is no PowerShell AD module. So even though Microsoft has been really nice about trying to make everyone use a command line now, as they should have done years ago, that integration is not there for Samba AD. The Samba team knows this, and I don't know the status. If it takes as long as it did for Samba 4 to come out, it might be 2030. Limited sysvol replication. So how many of you know what sysvol replication is? A few, yeah. If you're a Windows administrator, this is where all the GPOs or the policy objects are stored. And there's Windows services that replicate those. And in Samba, there aren't Samba services for replicating that. There's a hacky way you can use rsync. So that was manual and hacky and took a while. The directory mode maximum right now is 2008 R2. So don't try to do your, exclusively directory mode 20 16 and then just join your Samba AD to that. It's not going to happen, okay? And then we ran into some limited application of computer GPOs, and some of this had to do with the MIT Kerberos stuff too. So anyway, here's the way Samba and Samba AD happened in our distribution. Samba 4 first arrived in 2014. In January of 2014, we had Samba 4.1. And we told everybody it does not include support to operate as Active Directory. So sorry. You can just use regular shares and all of that because it did not integrate with MIT Kerberos. But magically, in 4.7, we introduced for the first time in OpenSUSE Leap 15 packages that had the Samba tool. So right now in Leap 15, which is the one that correlates to SLES, you have Samba 4.9, it's 4.9.5 something, still in a maintained branch. 4.11 is in Tumbleweed. Tumbleweed's the rolling release. And most people don't run rolling releases on servers. How many of you have Arch servers in your world, right? Whoa, dude! Give him this sticker, will you? Holy cow, okay. Yeah, I probably should have known that, huh? Okay, so here's your distribution of choice may have different package names. These are the ones that we include. So a general Samba one that has a client. This one connects to Ceph storage. We didn't use that in my example. The important one that was not there previous is Samba AD-DC, which has its own Samba-tool, which is the executable to manage the Active Directory piece. These are the official Samba releases as of 4 days ago. 4.12 is upcoming. The most current is 4.11, and they have this declining table in supportability. 4.8 was discontinued September the 17th. 4.9 is still getting security patches. 10 and 11 are current. We are using 4.9 right now. We started with 4.7, and that was a mess. Okay, so here's our case study environment. It's Liberty Christian School in Anderson, Indiana. There's about 550. They have two facilities. They have a high school. This is the elementary facility, and they also have a high school. There's about 550 total students, K through 12, and about 80 staff. There's about 150 or so Windows PCs, and Windows 10 is our standard. Zach helped to build the image for that this summer. Again, kudos to him. We have somewhere around 575 active Chromebooks, and a whole bunch of them that are essentially bricks because Google stopped supporting the hardware. And then there's approximately one old system administrator, because I say approximately because I'm not really full-time, and I'm sort of old. We have two teenage helpers, Zach and Trent here. And then the school actually deemed it, all right, we'll cave in and give you one part-time staff person. So for the last 2 years, I've had a part-time staff person to help out with, I can't print kind of questions. So here's the IT information. Each facility is running 2 clustered KVM servers. The reason is because when I started doing this 10 years ago for a charitable stipend, I only agreed to do it if they gave me discretion to inject as much Linux as I wanted to into their environment. So we have a lot. And most of our servers were purchased on eBay and have had varying checkered hardware health issues, but you know, it's okay. We use storage via iSCSI. Leap 15.1 now is on all of the servers, so they're not burning any of my enterprise licenses. It's all open stuff. We have 2 Windows servers, one of which is getting ready to be decommissioned, and they're running as appliances. So Windows is really good running a single application. That's really where we put it. Okay, so SUSE Linux Enterprise Server was the default when I started in 2009. We started with SLS 11 just even before it was GA, so it was really old and kind of ugly, and we moved everything to Leap 15. Windows 10 is our standard Windows, and we have a DC and a share server in each of the 2 facilities. So I have one server that's running all my shares and one that's a DC in each building. However, because we have fiber between them, people have access to shares in both buildings. So if the connection between buildings is down, like it was on Monday morning because of a failed network card, people complain that they can't see their files. So what are the compelling events that drove us to do this insanity? First of all, we had a 9-year-old Samba 3 LDAP domain that was getting more difficult to support, and every time there was a user change, I had to do it, and that was not good. So, and it was getting harder to support. In fact, Windows 10 1803 breaks the domain join. So if you have Samba 3 LDAP, how many of you run Samba 3 somewhere? Anyone? Yeah, this is a problem. Okay, so even though it can stay in, you can't use the domain join utility anymore with a Samba 3 domain, even with all of my very cool registry hacks. We needed better standardization and interoperability. Also plan for the post-Don era included something normal people could use, right? And we had no budget. Okay, so no money, but we got to do all these things. Whee! And the local admins know Windows for what that's worth, and it's worth some time is what it's worth. So here's how we implemented it and what our design was. We put a DC virtual machine in each of the 2 facilities. And then we did what's called the classic upgrade from Samba 3 LDAP to Active Directory. This is classic in that you remember how hard you worked when you first started in IT? We're going to take you back to those days. We chose to use the internal DNS for our Samba AD domain. So we just added the subdomain ad.libertyonline.org and then forward it out to the bind environment for the rest of my DNS for libertyonline.org. We retained all the old share server names because we really didn't want to have to redo drive mappings. And we rebuilt brand new VMs as domain members to deliver those shares. So reconnecting NFS points and iSCSI shares and all of that stuff. We reconfigured the dependent services, so there were 2 things that were using the LDAP previous, our school information system and Google G Suite. So we use GCDS, Google Cloud Directory Sync. Is that what it is, right? Google Cloud Directory Sync, yeah. So essentially, every night a script runs that synchronizes the AD domain with the Google domain. So that's important for a school district because for us, we use graduation year as a separate OU. So that way, the students that are graduated 5 years ago, their accounts sort of go off the map until they push the panic button and call the school office and say, all of my docs were there! We had to go back and help them. And then we wanted to replicate it in a virtual world first to test, because if you don't replicate it in a virtual environment and test it, you really won't understand what's going on. The problem with one of the problems with classic upgrades is it's one way, right? Once you do it, that's the end, right? There's no going back. So we were there in January. Oh yeah, and you want to make sure you have really helpful people like Trent and Zach to make this work, right? So they were there as hands and legs in the process. So there's good and bad and ugly. There's far more good than there is bad or ugly, but I'll explain all of this briefly anyway. All the users and machines with passwords imported, everything. We imported it, and I could see it. The shares work, okay? My Windows admin tools work. Ah! And we accomplished it over winter break this January. Although some of this, I don't know if you call it winter break when you're working on something at 2:30 in the morning, if that would be a break, right? But we've been running continuously since then. So this is the first school year where we've actually had the AD front end. And it has made for less work for me by offloading my user management stuff. The bad part is all the users were stuck into one OU, all of them. I had like several OUs, but it put them all into one. The groups were imported, but unpopulated. So I had group names, right? And nobody in them. So these guys helped me to get past that one. That was the classic part, right? We needed a bunch of file permission changes. I mean, this was because of how our shares were constructed. And obviously, in moving over, the file ownerships changed. So we had to do we used group level permission changes mostly to get past that. The manual sysfile replication for policies. We had to build rsync and test that and make sure everything was working between the two buildings. So that way when we created policies, they actually show up on all the computers, right? All of these are mitigated. Now, I mean, we've gone past this. Everything's working. Those were temporary issues that we had to mess with, but it's fixed now. This was an ugly one, which I did not see until a week after I'd done the implementation, that Samba labeled the MIT Kerberos I was using experimental. This was not a good thing to find out after you've done a project, right? After you've done all these. And the reason is because there was a bug that affected it at deploy time. So this bug, which is CVE, all of you guys familiar with CVEs, common vulnerabilities and exposures. Essentially, the effect was at random times during the day, the Kerberos server stopped. Which, if the Kerberos server isn't running, how many people can log in? 0, right? Nobody. Yeah, so this is not a good thing. I had to write a custom salt state that would check if the Kerberos process was running. And as soon as it stopped, it would send a beacon to my salt master, and the salt master would tell it to restart Samba. So this was happening quite a bit during the first week or so, and then they fixed the bug in the software, and it went away. So even this is mitigated too. So the reality is we've got something really good. So any questions before we do a live look-in here? Yeah.
I've got two quick questions. The first one is the sysfall.
Yes.
Is there any reason you couldn't just put that on Gluster or something like that so that it's, always everywhere?
On a shared file system, well, you run the risk because Samba does not know, and that's a good question, and you should get. So are you wearing the red hat to annoy me, or just because?
I didn't know you worked for SUSE.
Okay, well that's fair. Then here I'll give you this. So I just had to ask, right? Because some of us even have SUSE socks, right? No, they don't recommend that you do that, in part because the DCs, it's not a true, because of that not replication, Samba tells you you can't just like turn one, you have one that is the DC, the designated one, right? And it's not an automated process to turn it in the other one into the DC. There's manual intervention required, and you run the risk too of potential, if I jack it up in that one shared place, I'm toast, right? So really don't want to be
so the problem
killing
is,
it.
If I make a mistake on side A, I do not want that mistake to automatically replicate across the
Correct, yeah. And really the only thing that sysvol is handling is GPOs. And we'll talk about that. So do you know what GPO stands for? Anybody know what GPO stands for? Yeah, Group Policy Object, right? Yeah, I used to curse Microsoft for GPOs, but I live with it now. So anyway, so at the school, I have a Windows box, and we're going to look at. It's here. Let me make this bigger. So this is my Active Directory, and you can see I have users in these student groups. Ones are sorted by calendar year. Each of these has students in them. We give the students Windows logins. There's a Windows lab in the high school that they can log in. Most of them are using Chromebooks for their internet access, and they log in using their Google ID, which is synchronized with Active Directory. So we moved these around so they're not all in the same OU with the teachers. So I have a separate location for teachers and staff are down here. We have a separate location for Chromebooks because we have some students who are too young to have their own assigned email account. So they get a machine account and log into that Chromebook account, and their email can't go out of the school. It's restricted to only in the school domain because of parental things, right? So this is AD, and it's been very healthy, even with the break in the communication between the two buildings that occurred this last week. So we do have some domain policy, and the person here responsible for this is Zach. Yay! So if I edit my domain policy, you'll actually see some stuff that he has done here. A lot of it is really nice, and it makes for things like, I'll show you some of the things that we've been able to do with it. So here's one of them. We set a unified background for all of our Windows machines. So nobody has their dog's picture on here anymore. And we have an established start menu, so we don't end up with with Microsoft Games as part of the start menu. Yeah, so we have Chrome and Firefox, and we pay Microsoft for Office still. So Office is delivered here, and this is part of the GPO stuff too. So we also have actually Firefox policy because we have proxy servers in each building, and by default, Firefox's proxy setting does not inherit a proxy from the system. It doesn't work. So we set that with a GPO, and then nobody ever complained anymore. So the live look-in from the Windows side is here. Let's take a little bit of a look from the Linux side. Okay? So this is one of my two domain controllers, Fledge, and I'm going to slide this over a little bit. There you go. So all of our servers are named after characters in the Chronicles of Narnia. So we have Caspian and Tumnus, Fledge and Farsight as part of the Active Directory domains. Those are all virtual machines that are running on Aslan, Azeroth, Poggin, and Puddleglum. Yeah, it's fun, ain't it? Right? Once you start down that road, you can't stop, right? So, so when I look at my Active Directory info on this server, my LDAP server is myself on this one. Fledge is the LDAP server, and the server name is fledge.ad.libertyonline.org. This is also our Kerberos realm. So the DNS subdomain is the Kerberos realm. And then it's using port 389, of course. And this is also the KDC server, so it's running Kerberos. And all of this is in Samba. So you can do, if you do Samba-tool with a -- help, you can see some of the things that Samba tool can do. Those of you who are the Samba 2 people, you will love this test parm. You might remember that from Samba days. This has always been a thing Samba does to test the parameters. But I just use it to show you what's in my smb.conf. So my smb.conf is very simple. It's in Etsy Samba, like always. I set my DNS forwarders in here so that anything that's not in ad.libertyonline.org, and these guys become the primary DNS for my Windows machines because you want your AD server to be the primary DNS. They forward out to my bind stuff for the rest of the world. I set a NetBIOS name and a realm. This is Kerberos realm, right? The server role is an AD, Active Directory Domain Controller. And then this uses, for the ID map, it uses RFC 2307. I set the net login path and sysfile. That's all I have on my domain controller. I have a second domain controller, and you can do a ton of things with Samba tool. You can do things like check the AD database. You can delegate things. You can look at DNS this way if you really want to. You can also use the Windows DNS tool for anything in ad.libertyonline.org, anything in that domain that it's controlling, you can use the Windows DNS tool. Yes, you can install the remote administration tools on any workstation that you want with the right credentials. Of course, you can manage Active Directory from that server. So our Windows machine that we've been looking at here, hang on, sorry. This one is sort of a laptop. Trent is laughing because it has no screen. It just has the metal things sticking out of the side of it, and it's behind the monitor on a desktop that I have because we busted the screen and didn't have the money to fix it and decided I'm just going to take this over and use it as my remote access machine. So you do what you have to, right? So that's what that one is. My share servers are Caspian and Tumnus, as I've explained. So if I go to one of those servers, so here's Caspian. This one happens to be in the high school. You can always use, I can do net ADS info on this guy also, and you can see that I'm joined to the same domain with the same Kerberos realm. Here I am also running, for file permission's sake, because this is a share server, I'm running SSSD to get my user authentication from the Active Directory domain. So I'm not running that on Fledge because I really don't want my normal users logging into the DC command line. Really not a good idea, and I don't care anyway. So, but here I actually do. So if I look at who is running this thing, and those of you who have been Samba people for a long time have been using net status sessions to see things for a long time, but you can see I have anybody that's in the 10.3 network is in the high school building. Anybody that's in the 10.2 network, like these two people, Kids Club and A. Clark, are in the elementary school. So I have people accessing shares on this server from both buildings. And this is a Saturday, so apparently I'm not teaching them to log out properly because they're all still connected. So I don't want to ruin this since this is real life, right? Trust me, I've ruined it enough in the past. I've had several times when so the target has been to keep this server live during school hours always, right? So we had a little downtime on Monday morning, in part because the school had neglected to pay Comcast their allotted amount, and Comcast responded by disconnecting the internet. And at the same time, I blew out a network card in one of my routers. So at the school, we use pfSense for both firewalls, and I'm using it for routing the fiber between the two buildings. And it's running on classic hardware, Core 2 something, 2 gig of RAM, I think, and 2 network cards. Those are my routers, right? And one of my routers just simply said no carrier, but the IP would ping on it, but it didn't matter what I did. Unplug the cable, plug in a cable, nothing changed. I'm like, make this network card go far away. So we did, and everything came back. So I can still blame it on Comcast. I can sort of. Or the city of Anderson, we leased the fiber from. We called them, and they're like, oh, no, everything looks good to us, which that was legit. It did look good. It was my little network card. So so that's the live look-in. And I'm going to go back to the presentation just for a sec here. Okay, let's go back here, go to presentation, there. So one of the things that we say at OpenSUSE is have a lot of fun. So if you do nothing on an OpenSUSE box, the first time you log in, the message of the day says, have a lot of fun. And so as you can see, we've been having a lot of fun. And now it's your turn to go have a lot of fun. So what questions do you have for me or for the team? Go ahead.
So you said that the
directory do not work.
Yes.
Is there
Samba knows this.
Is there a consolation prize? Can you work with it extensively in Bash, or is it just that there is no way to programmatically?
Yeah. So the consolation prize is Samba tool, where you can actually do GPO editing and you can do some scripting there.
Things and move users to different
Right.
things,
Exactly.
all
Because
that sort of stuff in there.
yes,
Okay.
you can move users. You can create OUs. You can do all the things that you might, but obviously it does not meet the criterion that we had where making it more accessible, right? So that was part of my reason for going to AD, was so I could offload the user management. And if I have to teach somebody Samba tool, that's not a good thing, right?
Your regular people that
We don't want them using PowerShell anyway. Okay, you win.
With another tool, I'd be happy.
Yeah. Hopefully they'll get the message and change that and fix it. So, other questions? Yes. Oh, okay. Somebody wants to see my SSST. So that's another session. How many of you use SSST in your world? Yeah. So SSST is really nice. Let me show you my SSST, and then I gotta quit because there's another session in here. So as you probably know, SSST, it has a bunch of different potential directives in it. This one, obviously, you want to have this if you're using SSST, filter root, so it doesn't try to query the domain for the root password. This would be really bad. But you can use your domain has to be specifically the name of your Active Directory domain. It can't be a made-up thing like it can with LDAP. I set all my ID provider, my auth provider both be AD. I turn enumeration off because this is a slowdown mechanism, right? You only turn it on for test. Don't leave it on or it will slow things down. You always want to cache the credentials. That's a part of the function of SSST. I set my Kerberos canonicalization to be false. Set my fallback home dir and shell for logins for these users, and that's about all I had to do with SSST on this particular environment. So does that answer your question? Sort of, kind of, mostly? That has to do with MIT Kerberos and uppercase, lowercase, or canonicalization. So this was my old, I actually had SSST working against LDAP previously. So that's what this domain is. It's not active, but this is what we were using with LDAP prior. Okay? All right, thanks guys. Appreciate your attentiveness.